Got it. There we go.
It says it looks like it was deleted on Facebook.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. It is.
On today's Impactful Writing Podcast, How to Get Better at Writing and Storytelling, Part 2. I'm Caleb Monroe. He's Jay Sherer, and this is the Impactful Writing Podcast, which is produced by the Reclamation Society and is part of the Story Geeks Network. So tell us how you're doing this week, Jay.
Yeah, we started talking before the show started, and I was like, this has been the strangest week of all time. But I'm doing well. We'll get into this probably later, but Death of a Bounty Hunter, I was surprised because I wasn't expecting to hear. I don't know what the contest dates are where they're revealing stuff, but while I was out of town, we learned that Death of a Bounty Hunter has made the semifinals of Screencraft's cinematic book competition. And that was really exciting because every time we have a little bit of makes a little bit of progress in our writing, it's always fun and it's always validating. So we made the semifinals and that was exciting. Other than that, my week's been super weird, man, but I'm happy to be on this podcast with you. This will be fun.
Super weird. It's the new normal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Super weird is the new normal. I like it.
All right. So this week, how to get better at writing and storytelling. And the reason this is part 2 is because if you missed it back in, I believe it was November, Jay was traveling. And so I and our guest, Rachel Hemsley, covered this topic, but Jay was not able to be part of it because he didn't have the best Wi-Fi where he was traveling.
Yeah.
And so I've been wanting to revisit so we can get Jay's answers to these questions on how do you become a better writer. And so that's exactly what we're going to do this week.
Yeah, and who knows if I know what I'm actually talking about. But I really enjoyed your guys' show, and I'm sure that some of my answers will be similar. I didn't shy away from including the same answers because, quite frankly, some of the same answers just need to be said over and over and over again to people as a good reminder. But also, I may have different ways of looking at what you guys talked about. So you'll have to remind me as we go through, because I did listen to your show, but I don't remember all of it. So you have to remind me of like some of the areas where you had slightly different advice than me, and we'll just have a fun conversation about it.
Yes, and listeners, I recommend listening to the two of these together. And when you come across those bits of advice that perhaps Rachel and Jay and I all recommend, those might be some places to start. If you're
absolutely, yes, absolutely. You guys had a lot of wisdom in yours, so I appreciated that.
So we're going to start with Jay's 3 favorite pieces of traditional advice, then some 3 of his non-traditional pieces of advice, and then finally we're going to wrap it up with totally unexpected things. And so it'll get maybe a little more esoteric and a little less practical as we go, but all of these things matter in your life as a writer and in your growth as a writer. Yeah. So let's start. Jay, what is your first favorite traditional piece of advice for someone who's looking to become a better writer?
Yeah, and this one is like so normal that literally everybody who's ever given advice to writers has said this, I feel like. But you need to read. You need to read other people's things. You need to engage with other people's artwork, whether it is prose that you are literally reading, like I pulled up Death of the Bounty Hunter, I can like actually read it, or whether it's a film where you could actually read the script and watch the film. I did that with your guys' movie, The Mongolian Connection. I wanted to read the script and watch the film and see the differences that occur when we tell stories. Like these things are iterative things that if you read the first draft of Death of a Bounty Hunter, or if you even compare the novel version to the audiobook script, they're different, right? Like there's different things going on. So I think what's really important to do when you engage in someone else's creativity is that it can inspire you, don't get me wrong, but what's more powerful is if you actually study the similarities and study the differences in the way that you would have approached it. Because until you really do some level of comparison, and I don't mean comparison in like, well, is this person a better writer than me? That's like not a healthy question to ask. but more so, I mean, you can acknowledge that someone is a better writer than you. I'm not saying that that's unhealthy, but what I'm saying is don't just constantly compare yourself to other people. But what I'm saying is compare objectively your writing versus another, because you'll start to get a really good feel for what makes you different and how people might be attracted to your writing. You'll also learn how you're similar, and so you might say you can do things with that. Like now, I'm putting on my producer hat, but you can say, well, the audience that liked X is probably highly likely to like what I'm doing, right? So this could, because they're kind of similar in some ways, but then there are significant differences that are worth studying about those things too. And I think that I keep mentioning the word study. So when I say read, I don't mean I can go watch a movie and not watch it as a writer. Now that's kind of difficult for me at this point in my life because I've written so many things. But I can go into a movie and if I watch it as a writer, or if I read a script as a writer, if I read a book as a writer, I'm picking up on a lot different things than I would if I was just an audience member. And that can kind of ruin some kind of creative works for you because you're becoming too analytical about the thing. But what I think it does, it's really powerful, is you're able to look at it and say like, oh, I probably would have done that differently. And that's, again, it's not to say that you're better than or worse than or whatever. What it is to say what makes you unique, what makes it so people might want to read your stuff over and above someone else's things. And some of that style, some of that's substance, some of it's the way that someone would approach a story. All of those things I think are really meaningful, and they can actually be really powerful if you take the time to study them and then go, oh, okay, I might do that differently. And then come up with a reason in your head, like, why would you do it differently? And why would it matter that you did it differently? I think studying other people's writing, so read it, but then also study it a little bit as well. So that's my first one.
Yes. And I would recommend don't do those at the same time. So whatever it is that you're reading or watching or listening to, do it for enjoyment first. Because if you don't enjoy it, just as an audience member, don't study that one. That's not, that's not going to help you as much.
Yeah.
Like find the things that you just love just to consume. Do it for fun first, then go back and see if you can see some of the ways that they're doing it. And I will say, not all storytellers are equal. So I recommend, if you're going to put in time to study, and your time to do that is probably going to be limited because you have a whole life going on, and also you need to be writing more than you need to be consuming, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So
start with writers who have been big successes for 2 decades or more. Because it's one thing for someone to have a huge best-selling hit and then you don't hear much from them again. But the Steve Kings, the Lawrence Kasdans, the Grant Morrisons, these people who write these huge hits over and over and over again, study them before you study anyone else, because they're just they're operating at such a high level. They're, even for professional writers, they're in very rarefied air. And so not all storytellers are equal. Study those who've had big hits for 20 years or more to begin with. Then you can get down into specific things that are unique to you, or you never heard from that person again, but you still just love that movie. But start there, because you're going to, with your limited time. And as you were speaking, when you're talking about things being iterative, you reminded me, back in 2005, I worked in a comic book store across from the Empire State Building in New York City.
Oh,
and
cool.
We had a Jim Hanley's Universe, for any of you who are maybe in New York and shop for comics there. And during my time there, so it came out around 2005. I haven't seen it since, but there was a book that came out, and it was Neil Gaiman's first and last draft for the movie Beowulf.
No way.
And it was published, they were published together. So you could read the first draft and then you could read the last draft, and you could see all the changes that happened between where it began and what they actually shot.
That's cool.
If you can find that also would just be a great way of seeing how long and how interesting that road can be.
Oh, it can be really long and really interesting. And one caveat to what you said, because I totally agree. Like, spend time on the ones that you enjoy. I will offer one caveat to that, though. There are some times when the population at large will love something, but for you, especially as a writer, you will for lack of a better word, you will struggle with it. And this has happened to me numerous times where I'm like, oh, everyone loves this, but I struggle with it. And I actually find those really helpful to dig into because it does two things. One, it makes you appreciate the thing better once you look at the overarching story and what it's trying to say about the world and you do an analysis of it. You actually can actually can start to see it the way other people see it and then appreciate it more, which is sometimes rare, but sometimes as a writer, you can do that. I've done that. I've had that experience multiple times. When you and I talked about Us, Jordan Peele's Us, when I just sat down and watched Us, I went, yeah, it's pretty entertaining. And he's a good storyteller. But when we analyzed it, I had a whole new appreciation for it. The second thing that can happen is that you can actually figure out why, even though the world loves it, that you have an issue with it. And I've found a lot of really meaningful insights into the process of storytelling. So, for example, I have a really, really hard time. Everyone hates that I say this. I even had a guy that was calling me like, all the experts disagree with you, so you must be wrong. But I find the movie Logan, which is about Wolverine, I find it pretty anticlimactic, and I also find that they try to paint him as a hero by the end of it in a way that I don't think he deserves. And I literally went through the entire thing and said, everyone loves this, but I don't. Why? And I actually know why I feel that way. I totally appreciate the movie for what it is, but there's some little irk I have about it, and I'm not going to go into it here because it's way too long. But it helped me understand, like, well, if I'm going to tell a similar story, which I love those kinds of darker, more realistic human stories, well, then what do I need to do differently so I don't even irk myself, right? Like, what is it about that I need to change slightly? So, and I'm talking about a movie that could be critiqued in a lot of amazing ways because it's a very, very, very good movie. So if there's a very good movie that you're like, man, everyone loves this, but I have one issue with it, really dig into that to see why the issue exists for you, so that you can actually change your writing a little bit as well and go alongside it. So yeah, I think you're right. Like dive into the good stuff, but also dive into the stuff that like upsets you a little bit.
Right, but just don't. I would say don't fall down the hole if you find the thing that's different between you and everyone else is just taste. Then don't worry about it, because you can't analyze taste. Right. If it seems like there's maybe something technical going on, then dig into it for sure. But Logan is an interesting example. I would say if you can find a writer whose work leaves you both hot and cold, sometimes you love it, sometimes it just misses for you.
Yeah.
Stephen King is an example of this for me.
Right.
Mark Miller, who wrote Old Man Logan, which was a huge influence on the movie Logan. He also wrote Kick-Ass and Kingsman, Wanted, a lot of things that have been adapted.
Yeah.
And about 50% of his books I love and I'm super impressed by, and I want to learn how to pull off some of the things he does. The other 50% just missed me entirely. I'm like, I felt nothing that whole time.
Yeah.
And I have learned a lot by trying to figure out why the same creative mind can hit me and miss me at the same time, or very close to each other.
Yeah, could not agree more. I mean, and that is true of I think that's true of any creator. No matter how great they are, they still have works that you are like, how did that get done? And that's instructive because a lot of times that can relate to process. How much time did they have to work on the story? Was it rushed? Did they just need to get something out the door? Were the producers just kind of pushing them in a certain direction that they actually weren't inspired to go? And so those things are instructive too. So I couldn't agree more. Like figuring out why somebody is like amazing, but then sometimes they'll release something and you're like, was that worth doing? It happens a lot of times. Like for example, I think it's happened with Steven Spielberg when he has concentrated a little less on the story he's trying to tell in order to push the envelope in terms of the technology. Like, I will tell you that like sometimes it all just comes together perfectly, like Jurassic Park, where it's like not only is the story amazing, but also he's pushing the tech. But then you have something like Ready Player One, which I would argue is like, well, he's definitely pushing the tech, but I don't know that he's as concentrated on the story aspects of it. And I don't know him, so he would have to contradict me and tell me I'm totally wrong. But I think that some of those kind of things can happen too, where you can appreciate a story for different reasons also, and say, okay, well, it missed the mark over here, but it just nailed it over here, and then learn from that. Again, it's like all about studying the thing.
And keep in mind that when someone is at the top of their game like that, they don't want to do the same thing over and over again. And so I find that roughly every other project, you see them trying something different that they haven't done before, maybe a little out of their wheelhouse. And that's a place where you can watch them grow as writers and see what they're doing. And also just understand, because this is going to apply to you, no matter what level you are as a writer, understand that some of your experiments will not work, or they will not work, or they will not resonate with people in the same way that others will.
Yeah.
And you have no control over it. You cannot create a single result. You can write something that you think is the best thing you have ever written in your life, and maybe no one likes it. You can also write something that just feels kind of middle of the road for you, and that can be the thing that becomes your bestseller. It's the emotions that you have and your personal perspective on your work don't really mean anything when it comes to how it means nothing when it comes to how the work exists in the world. And just know that.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe, look at all the artists over the course of history and look at how many of their works where the creative mind behind the work was 30, 40 years ahead of the audience. And so then they die before the work becomes transformative, So I think that there's an element too of like, sometimes the greatest artists aren't even recognized as great in their lifetime because the rest of the audience hasn't caught up to them. So I think all of those things are very true, and you have to take them with you have to take your work with, do the best you can possibly do, study doing the best you can possibly do, and then let it be what it's going to be, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to move us on because we just spent 15 minutes on our first of 9 points.
I know.
We're going to try to move more quickly through some of the rest of these, but good. It was a good conversation. It was worth having. So what is your second favorite piece of traditional writing advice, Jay?
Yeah, and I'll give you these two. We can go through these two really, really fast because these are super simplistic. There's two. My second and third in this section are spend time writing and collaborate with others. So like, if you don't practice the thing, it doesn't matter how many times you've read someone else's work. If you have not tried to apply it to a page, your learnings to a page, then it will never, it will only impact your mindset a fraction of what it could if you actually started to try to apply it. So in order to be better at writing, you actually have to write. And you will look back at it's almost impossible not to look back at what you wrote a month ago and be like, oh man, that's not as good as I would have written it today. And it's because you have to be a practitioner of the thing to actually get better at the thing. There's no substitute for practicing. And when I say practicing, it doesn't mean that you're not going to actually release it. You're not just writing for writing's sake, or writing it for you're not just doing an exercise. You can be writing your next novel, but if you are writing, it is getting you further into being a better writer. So I would say just that. And then also, I think we've talked about this a lot on this show, that we have both benefited from collaborating. And when I say collaborating, it could be joining a writing group. It could be actually having a co-writer on your project, or working with a director, or working with actors, or whatever. Creativity is improved when we butt up against other creative minds a lot of times, because even if we dislike the idea that another creative mind is bringing to the table, it can still inspire us to go a third path. And I'm a really big component of saying, your A path and your B path are probably both insufficient, and you have to go to a C path. You have to get to another level. And I think collaboration can help you propel yourself forward in those kind of ways. So I'm a really big fan of those two. So those are all the traditional: read, write, and work with other people.
Yes. And when you do work with other people, I'm going to tell you one of my go-to question when I want another writer to help me the most in the least amount of that person's time. I ask this: did every page make you want to read the next page? If not, when is the first time that didn't happen?
Ooh, that's a great question.
And that will that will give you so much workable, constructive, improving feedback just from that one simple question. So put that in your toolbox.
Yep.
And I will say, going back to your spending time writing, this is the difference between being an author and being a writer. And you don't want to be an author. You want to be a writer. An author is someone who did write, who has written. A writer is someone who still writes. And those are not the same thing. So you want to be a writer. You want to be maybe not. Maybe your goal is to write one thing and then be an author the rest of your life. That's okay. Some people do that and they're happy and they're content. But I think most of the people listening to us here want to be writers. And so that means you've got to keep doing it. Otherwise, you stop being a writer.
Yeah.
And then I'm also just going to throw out, are you familiar with Heinlein's rules, Jay?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so Robert Heinlein, very famous science fiction writer. He was the first science fiction writer to get published in the Saturday Evening Post. So he's the first mainstream successful science fiction writer. And in 1947, this little collection of essays from different writers about writing came out called Of Worlds Beyond.
Nice.
You don't need to track it down because most of it's not very good. But at the tail end of Heinlein's, genuinely, literally the last 5 paragraphs of his essay, of a very forgettable essay. Everyone pretty much agrees it's a forgettable essay. But in those last 5 paragraphs, he gives what he calls his 5 business rules for writing. Oh. And to this day, I know writers, very successful writers, who follow these. And I know other very successful writers who don't and think that they're outmoded. So I recommend trying them.
Yeah.
And seeing where it stretches you, and also see which one of these is the hardest for you. That will tell you something about yourself as a writer.
Yeah.
So here's the 5 rules.
Yeah.
1, you must write. 2, you must finish what you start. 3, you must refrain from rewriting except to editorial order. 4, you must put it on the market. And 5, you must keep it on the market until sold. He's talking specifically about selling to publications. Yeah. And then he says they are amazingly hard to follow, which is why there are so few professional writers and so many aspirants, and which is why I am not afraid to give away the racket.
Nice, that's awesome. That's awesome. Those are good. I like those a lot.
And it's worth noting that he called them business rules, not writing rules. But that, again, if you want to be a professional writer, your writing has to be business. Yeah, exactly. And so you got to write, you got to finish it, you got to put it out in the world, and you got to do that until things get sold, or else you're just writing for your drawer. Yeah. So try those. I recommend.
Yeah, that's great. Those. I love it. I love those. In fact, my next one is sort of a segue from that, so it's perfect.
So now we're moving into the non-traditional pieces of advice that we've uncovered over time. So, Jay, what is your first non-traditional piece of advice?
So my first non-traditional piece of advice: there are a lot of creative people out there that are instantly going to throw something at the screen when I say this, and so I apologize in advance for you breaking your monitor. But I think that you should. This is what I have learned. This has been very impactful to me. I think that you should take off your writer's hat, set it on the far side of the room, pretend you're not a writer anymore, and put on your producer's hat, and then assess your story as if you were the producer of it, not the writer of it. And you have several benefits from doing this. The first benefit you have is that whenever you're in a writing group, we talked about collaboration a little bit. Whenever you're in a writing group, I think you should receive feedback both as a writer, but also as a producer, and have a mentality of a producer when you receive feedback. Because when a writer receives feedback, the emotion that goes into the keyboard or the pen is palpable, and it is important, and it is meaningful what goes into that. But sometimes that emotion can cloud your better judgment when you assess the story from an audience's perspective, or when you assess the story from. So if you want to get better, I think that if you put on your producer's hat and set your writer's hat in another room where you can't see it and it's not going to impact you, what you can do is you can basically ask the questions like the one you asked. When did you stop finding this interesting? And if the person says, well, page 10 got super uninteresting to me, it was so boring, and that's your favorite page, because on that page is when you really poured your heart out about whatever it was you were doing. If you have your writer's hat on, it's really hurtful. It's hard for it not to be hurtful, because it meant something to you as the energy from your fingers went into the keyboard and showed up on the screen, or went into the pen and showed up on the page. It was really meaningful to you. And then you're going to receive feedback that says it wasn't meaningful to me as a reader. If you have your producer's hat on, the question that the producer is always trying to ask the question that is, how do I get this into the hands of the right audience who really appreciates it, who will find it meaningful, and who will be willing to exchange value? Exchange value either by spending their time engaging with the story, actually picking it up. Every time someone picks up a book or or watches a movie, they are using their time. You only have, if you're lucky, 80 years or so on this earth. And for someone to take 4 of those hours to read Death of a Bounty Hunter, or for someone to take 2 of those hours to watch The Mongolian Connection, that is an exchange of value. And you need to provide something of value to people so that they can go, oh, wow, that improved my time of this 80 years that I'm spending on this earth. It improved it. So the producer's mindset is to see, how do I find what the people need, and how do I make it the best possible thing to put in front of them? And that's not always the writer's perspective, but it is always the producer's perspective. Some producers are money hungry, and they only want to make money, and they don't care how good the thing is. They just want to get it in front of you and have a cool trailer and make you pay them money to get it. But really good producers, and as a producer, should be thinking like, how do I make this the best it can possibly be? And so if someone were to say to you, like they said, I got bored on page 10, and page 10 was the most meaningful thing to you, doesn't mean the writing was bad. It doesn't mean the writer is bad. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means it's not the best possible foot forward for this story in the hands of the audience you're trying to reach. So think like a producer, set aside your writer's hat, and it will think about it completely different.
I would say think like a creative producer. There's lots of different types of producers. Don't think like a line producer.
Yeah.
And I will say that really this is rewriting advice, not writing advice. You have to have something to produce first. So you have a creative voice, you have a critical voice. Don't start with your critical voice. Kick it out of the room, write the piece, then you can bring in some critical voice and look at it. But this is really rewriting advice. Don't start here. Don't start with what can I make money doing, or things like that, because that just leads to really bad stories. We've all seen it. And I would also say, because I've said this so many times, I think I even said it earlier in this episode, that how you feel about something you just wrote has zero reflection on how good it is.
Totally.
You can hate a scene, and that's everyone's favorite scene.
Yep.
You can feel like it's the worst thing you've ever done, and yet everyone loves it. You can also write a scene that you are so proud of, and you think it's one of the best things you've ever written, and that's what the editors want you to cut out because nobody likes it. So know that how you feel about something you've written does not have any correlation at all with its quality, but you still have to go through that process. You
Yes.
can't skip. You can't skip to not caring what the emotions are. When you write it, you have to feel something about it. You have to, you know what I mean? You have to like what you're doing. You have to be satisfied. You have to hopefully feel some of the emotions that your characters are going through. You can't skip past that. Even though the ultimate result, there's no correlation, you still have to go through it in that direction. The way you feel about your writing, and then the way it actually operates in the world.
Yeah, and from a more esoteric looking at the world as a writer, it's interesting because I don't know when this started happening, in probably 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s. The world around us started to communicate that feelings were the most important thing. And I'm not trying to say these feelings aren't important at all. They're really, really important, and your perspective ends up being your reality. So, but I think as a writer, you've got to understand how important your feelings are to your creativity, but you also have to say, but my feelings aren't necessarily the most important thing, right? So, because you will make decisions, if you make all of your decisions based on how you feel, that is not a good way to make decisions, not a good way to make good decisions.
Although
Um,
all the recent scientific evidence indicates that that's actually how we make all our decisions, is emotions first and information second.
yeah.
So, but it have both.
Exactly. That's the point, right? It's like
Yes.
you naturally are going to make your decisions based on your emotions, but if you have a pause button to say, okay, wait a minute, how do I add an analytical framework to my emotional state? You can actually, I think, make a better decision down the road. So, so yeah, you're automatically. So here's the thing: you're automatically going to make feelings-based decisions, and that's not bad, but it helps you out a lot if you can bring analytical thinking to your emotional decisions, and that can help you make better ones. And I think that's kind of what I'm saying with the producer's framework, is that you're adding a few analytical things, but you're not removing feeling from it. Because as a producer, Nathan and I both produced our book, right? I'm just using this as an example because it's so timely, not because I'm just like, hey, let me just advertise my book to you again. But we both produced this, and at the end of the day, we still want it to impact people's lives as the producer, not as the writer, not as the creative force, but as the producer, we want it to impact people's lives. And we want to find an audience for it. And so ultimately, any kind of feelings-based or even analytical thinking is for an end goal that is hopefully worthy of being an end goal. So,
and part of this comes down to whether you are a muse writer like me, instinctive, or more of a mechanic writer like Jay. You're building something. They're both perfectly acceptable ways to write, and we all have an inclination towards one of them or the other. But if you're a muse, you're going to want to bring in your critical voice as late as possible, if at all. You may actually need to surround yourself with other people who can do that, so that you can just listen to your instincts. Because unfortunately, the more you put on your analytical hat, the less you can hear what your instincts are.
Yeah.
And if those are crucial to how you write, then maybe don't put that hat, like maybe let someone else put that hat on for you, or have a co-writer, or have a partner, or any of those sort of things. And for a muse, I'll tell you how I do this. And that is time. I just finish something and then I set it aside, and I come back to it a month later, a week later, 6 months later, a year later, depending, what it is. And I'm able to see it with fresh eyes because I don't really remember the details.
Right.
And so I can move through it instinctively and emotionally again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel right. And then I'm trying to fix that and massage that. And I never really am doing it from that real critical point of view. It's always still instinctive, but the time has enabled me to come back to it and do it instinctively, but not fall into the same feelings I had before, because I don't really remember. Because I've since then I've written 3 or 4 or 5 more things, and I don't remember what I was feeling, or often I don't even remember scenes. I'm like, wow, that's a great scene. I don't remember writing that. But, hey.
Yeah, and this is a good time to pause to say, and I probably should have thought about saying this before I even started giving my advice. The reason why I invited Caleb to start podcasting with me on a show called the Impactful Writing Podcast was because I knew that Caleb and I had similar goals in regards to our writing. We wanted to write meaningful and impactful things for audiences. However, I could tell after talking to Caleb that while our minds, when we're analyzing a story, work very similarly, the way that we construct them is very different. And so one of the reasons why we want to have these kinds of shows, by the way, I wasn't even thinking that I would offer you my things that I've learned about how to create stories, because I thought that Caleb and Rachel did such a good job with theirs. But Caleb said, I really want to hear yours. And one of the reasons why it's important for writers to externalize some of the things that they're doing, or some of the things that they're struggling with, or some of the things that they've learned, is because we don't all work the same. And you can follow a bunch of different blueprints for how to get from A to Z. And Caleb's blueprint is going to look way different than my blueprint. And another reason why I actually thought about doing this show, where because Caleb and Rachel had already done their show, I thought about doing this show as just a video where I'm like, here's some things I've learned. And then, it's not a conversation. It's just a video. And I didn't do that either, because Caleb was like, no, I would really want to hear it. And I realized that when he was saying that, one of the things that would be valuable to everybody out there watching is that you would hear when Caleb would go, "Ooh, that would not work for me at all." Right? Like, so in other words, these things are not prescriptive. They are just what works for us. And so we want the same goal in mind: impactful, powerful, meaningful works. However, how we get to those works is very different. And that's actually part of why we can learn from each other. It's why I like collaborating with Caleb. It's why I like listening to Caleb's his advice and the way he does things, because we do not do them the same. So we can always learn from other people, but it doesn't always mean that we should or can do it in the same way.
And that's a great example of Jay's third traditional point, which is putting yourself in community with other writers.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure, if you're listening to us and you're not sure, I'm not sure. Do I have Muse leanings or mechanic leanings? Try them. Try all his tools. Try all my tools and see what works for you. Maybe it'll be some from each box, but try them. The thing about writing is the act of writing is also the act of practicing writing.
Yep.
And so just never be afraid to try something.
Yep.
So maybe you write 3,000 words of something that no one is ever going to see, but you've learned something that will happen that will make your next story better. So,
yeah. And don't hesitate from disagreeing with someone passionately, but still respecting them in your mind. Right? Like one of the first things that came up as Caleb and I were talking was that he said, "Oh yeah, you're more of a mechanic and I'm more of a muse." So I can say very passionately to Caleb, there's no way that I could do a story that way, because it just wouldn't work for me. And yet still respect that Caleb is telling what he's saying is incredibly valuable to him, right? So those are just some things, like be passionate about what it is that you've learned, but also be really respectful to the people you're collaborating with, because the way that they think can be really impactful to you if you're open enough to listen and take for yourself what will work.
Yeah, there's a saying that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And you could modify that and say as a writer, you're the average of the 5 writers you spend the most time with. Or the 5 writers, and that may be people who are dead and you just read, or people who are alive and you never met but you read. But ask yourself, who are the 5 writers that you spend the most time with? And try to have some variety in there, because that is how you grow. You get stretched. You expose yourself to people who do things differently than you, maybe better than you, but certainly don't see it or approach it the way you do. And you learn from that. And that's how you get better. That's why we're doing this in the first place. Why I'm sharing my things. Rachel shared her things. Jay is sharing his things.
Yep.
So let's do those. We'll do the next two together. Give us your next two non-traditional pieces of advice that you've
Okay.
uncovered over your life as a writer.
Yeah, and this one is a really, really weird one, and I've not heard a lot of people talk about it, but I have, and this is, I would like to hear your thoughts about this from a Muse's perspective, because this is like such a mechanic thing to say. But I have learned a lot about storytelling. So this is slight difference between writing and storytelling. Writing is storytelling; it's just a certain type of medium for it. But both are trying. Both what I'm going to talk about and writing are trying to accomplish the same thing, which is to engage an audience in a story. But I would actually recommend that you pay attention to your own and other people's oral storytelling, because as you tell a story or as someone else tells a story to you, pay attention to your reactions. It's you never will. I don't know of anybody who sits down and watches someone read their writing, right? Like, hey, look, you're going to read the book in the corner. I'm just going to watch you and look at what page you're on and look at the little minor facial expressions that you make. Like, that's very unusual. However, when you tell a story to someone else orally, you will see their reactions in real time. You will know if they're bored. You will know if they're engaged. You will know if your twist or your punchline or whatever it is engages them. And I think if you can take this aspect of like, okay, I'm going to tell a story that was really impactful to me, that was funny, it was emotional, it was sad, whatever, and I'm going to tell it to somebody else. If you can watch how they respond, you can learn about the process of telling stories. How do you start the story? How do you start a story that that the audience goes, I'm instantly engaged? How do you finish the story where you get the best laughter? I have told stories. I have changed the way that I tell oral stories to someone else about things that happened to me in real life, not my fiction, things that happened to me in real life. I have changed the way I've told them because I realize if I say this and then I say this, I get a better laugh than if I had reversed them. So I changed the way I told it because then now I made the story more enjoyable for the audience. And I've watched other people do the same thing. And this is something that you can learn. And the reason why I say that you need to apply it to your writing is because I observed some people who are amazing storytellers, and they experienced the exact same event that I experienced. And then I heard them tell a third party about it. And I listened to the way that they told it. And I realized, oh, they exaggerated that part of it. Oh, they came in with more conflict in that part of it than I think was actually apparent at the time that I was experiencing it with them. And what it did was it engaged the person, and they were like, no way. They were the whole time they were very engaged in this process of hearing this story told to them. And so, and this has happened to me before too. I had this really, here's my oral storytelling for you guys. As a storyteller, I had this really anxiety-producing experience. My first friend who got married asked me to be his best man. I was the second in line to be best man, by the way. I've never actually been the first in line, I don't think. I've been the best man 4 times. I think I've always been the second in line. But what does that say about me? I'm not sure. But I go to do my toast, and I had planned to do this toast, and I'm planning to tell a story about the toast. And it was a funny story because it was my friend. When we were kids, we were riding bikes, and he was on a bike that was like for an 8-year-old, but he was like a 14-year-old, and he's going down this hill and he's going really fast. And the handlebars came off the frame of the bike. So he had no control. And of course he crashed, and it was really funny. So I got up there and I told that story of what happened. And I explained and I gave context for why I was telling the story, why it was a toast. And I told the story, and I got quite a big laugh. And when I was done telling the story, I went off to the side. I was just doing whatever I was doing. And one of the photographers, the wedding photographers, came up to me and he goes, "That's one of the best toasts that I've ever heard." And I go, "That's the worst thing you could possibly tell me." I didn't tell him this because I said, "Oh, thank you. I appreciate that." But I knew that if I was ever going to do another toast that I was like set up to fail for the next one, because you can't have a wedding photographer who hears dozens of toasts per year tell you that this was a really good one, because then you're going like, it'd be like writing the best book you ever written the first time out of the gate, and then being like, now you got to follow it up with something better. You know, you'd be like, no, don't tell me that. Like,
that's such a writerly anxiety too. If you weren't a writer, you probably would have been like, thanks, and then like walked off to the to get some cake, you know.
100%. And so, but this is what I learned. I learned that I practiced that toast a bunch of times, telling it as a story to my wife and to other people. And I would pick up on the areas where they didn't find connection, because I could see it in their eyes. I could see their response. I could see in real time how they were responding to the words that were coming out of my mouth that built up to a conclusion and a story. And I even added things at the very last minute that did not happen on my previous practice session, because as I could watch people's faces, I could see where I was losing them and when I was not losing them. And if you can take that same approach and think about that, watch how people respond, watch how your intro sets it up, watch how your middle creates conflict, watch how your resolution sits with them. And if they have an emotional response or a thought response or a whatever you're trying to elicit from them, oral storytelling, in my opinion, whether you're watching other people do it or whether you're doing it yourself, especially, is really, really, really insightful into telling better stories. So that was a long way of expressing that, but that's my number 2.
But your number 3 ties really closely in with that.
It does, yeah. And I don't remember if you guys said this, but I don't even know where I heard this, but I think you really should read your own stories that you wrote, that you typed out. I think you should read them out loud. You don't have to read them to other people necessarily, but one of the things that I've really recognized and learned a lot from is that every human brain works a little bit differently. Like the classic example is like the George Lucas dialogue is almost impossible for any actor besides Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill, right? Like the way he writes dialogue is just pretty weird. And yet some people's brains work in the way that George Lucas's brain works, and they can do it. But for a lot of us writers, we're not wanting the brain to have to work too hard. We want it to work hard, but we want it to work hard on the parts of the impactful storytelling that we're trying to impart to the brain. We're not trying to get it to work hard on understanding the words on the page. So I have learned that if I read my work out loud, and this was really helpful when we did Death of a Bounty Hunter and translated that into an audiobook, because I had read it out loud. I knew that it was either easy or difficult to say. I tweaked it beforehand. And there were still times when the actor would be sitting in front of the page and they would just stumble over the sentence like 4 or 5 times. And I would have to say, hang on a second, let me give you a different sentence. And I would just write it out for them and say, try it this way instead. And they would instantly click. And then I go, okay, I want things to instantly click because I'm trying to make an impact. I'm not trying to create barriers to that impact. And my writing style, or the way that the words are laid out on the page, even if they're ultra creative and technically proficient, if they create a barrier to creating the emotion that I'm trying to elicit or the thought process that I'm trying to get someone to, then I need to try and remove that barrier if possible. And so if I read it out loud, if I stumble over it, guess what? Even in someone else's mind, they could stumble over it, even if they're not reading it out loud. So I would say always read your work out loud, because you can find the patterns of going, oh, that's not the best way to say that. And then you can go back in and change it so that it's actually easier for your audience to deal with.
This is so important to me in my process. I read everything out loud just to myself in a room. This is so important to me that if I'm really pushing a deadline, I could easily write until the minute this thing is due. It's due at midnight. I got to send the email at 11:59. And there's a scene that I know is not working. I want to make it work better. There's some things that I was hoping to do that I will put all of those aside. If I know it's going to take me 45 minutes to read the story, I will stop, even if I feel like those scenes are incomplete or there's a logic gap somewhere, and I will read the story out loud instead. Because a story that has been read out loud and those first 3, 4, 5 pages have that musicality,
Mm.
I have found is more valuable than one that has a something working perfectly 30 pages in, you know.
Yeah.
And so I will, if I have to leave something incomplete, I will not let it be reading out loud of the story. And like they say, all stories are, no stories are finished, they're only abandoned. And so even when there's not a deadline pressure, at some point you have to make a choice.
Mm.
But the reason I think this is so important is because all writing, even writing on the page, written language is still an auditory art because our brain hears it. As
Mm.
we read it, we are hearing it in our brain. And that's why
Mm.
we stumble, is because it
Mm.
doesn't sound right. Or, and the possible exception to this is our brother and sister writers who are deaf. But
Ah,
even then, I've in the people I've known over the years who are deaf, I've noticed that it would have to be someone who was deaf from the very beginning, or from just from a few weeks or a few months old, because
right.
if they became deaf later, they still tend to hear things first in their mind,
Right.
because we're readers before we're writers,
Mm.
we're speakers before we're readers,
Mm.
and we're hearers before we're speakers.
Yeah.
So if you all of those things, our ability to write and read and speak, they're all built on hearing first. And so we
Yes.
hear these things in our mind. So even if no one is going to say these words out loud because it's a novel or something like that, or it's the descriptive part of the screenplay that is not going to make it into the final, the blueprint part,
Right.
still anyone who reads it is going to be hearing it.
Yeah.
And so you have to do this for everything. So don't just do it for dialogue or things that will be spoken out loud. Do it for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how important it is for me.
Yeah, I know. I could not agree more. I could not agree more. And really quick, let me jump back to the oral storytelling one just really quick, because I want to give an exercise that you can use in your daily life. So we all have these events that are very meaningful to us in some way. The story that I told about my friend with the handlebars that came off was really, really funny. He didn't get hurt, just so you know, he didn't get hurt, which is why it was funny. Otherwise, it would not be funny.
Well, he lived long enough to get married, at least.
Yeah, exactly. No, he's actually a very talented artist. His name is Win Erickson. You can go check out his paintings. His paintings are phenomenal. I actually have a tattoo on my body of one of his paintings that he did. But the exercise that I would recommend that you try is that when you experience this story, this event, this experience that happened to you in real life, the question is, can you, as a storyteller, tell a story that communicates to another human being how funny that story really was, how meaningful that story really was? And that is a challenge, because the way you experienced it, what are the little details that made that story, or that made that event so funny? What are the little details that made that event so impactful? That story could have been horrific, by the way. I can tweak a few details of that story and I can make it seem like it was like the worst possible thing that happened to my friend, and everyone would be crying instead of laughing, right? So what are the little things about storytelling that engage people? What are the little things about, so if you take an event that you go, that was really meaningful, whether it was sad, whether it was joyful, whether it was whatever, take that event and then interpret it as an oral storytelling device, and just watch people react to it. And I think that that's a really fun exercise, and it's a really difficult one. And don't beat yourself up if it's not great off the bat.
And know that you can't not do that. Every time you have to choose a word, you are shaping the story. Every time you have to, choose, do you call the bush green? Do you call it tall? Do you call it prickly? Every single one of those choices creates a different version of that story. And this goes back to our very first conversation where we were talking about, now some people use these words differently, but here's how I use these words. That narrative is any series of a sequence of events experienced by a conscious mind, but story is shaped narrative. And every time you tell a story, you are shaping it. You're not just like a recording device that's telling people that people can experience through you exactly what happened.
Yep.
You are choosing what details, and ultimately this will inform your writing, because any character that you have will choose the details
Yeah.
of what they're going to see and notice and in the world around them. You can have two characters in the same room, but that room will get described differently because they are going to notice different details and they're going to feel differently about them.
I am so glad that you said that, because I'll tell you why I told that as a toast speech, right? Because if I had told you the narrative of this is the event that happened, you might laugh and you might be like, that's really funny. But I wouldn't just tell that at a wedding, right? Like, here's my buddy flipping over on a bike. Instead, so what I did was I added narrative pieces that equated it to the moment that we were all experiencing at the wedding. And so he was off to the side with his bride, and they were at the bridal table. And I started the story by saying, I've been Wynn's friend for a really long time, and I've seen him through his ups and his downs. And right now you can see the look on his face. He's joyful. He's having a fantastic day. This is a meaningful event in his life. But I've experienced moments in his life that have been a little bit more challenging for him. And then I jumped into the story, right? So now I'm creating a story that builds up to a conclusion that Wynn is better off because he married his wife than he was when he was doing wild things with me, crashing his bike. So I think that's really important. It's more interesting as a story, and it connects to people in that moment, in that event, far better than it would have just as a narrative. If I would just told it randomly, people would have been like, why did you even do that?
And what this means for you as a writer is you need to understand everything that you do on the page is creating an expectation. But for it to work as a story, you then have to violate those expectations. Yeah. Because if all you do is give people expectations and then fulfill every single one of those expectations, it's a very boring story and no one wants it. It's something they've seen before. For a story to be new or feel new, it's got to do something differently than what's expected. And so you're setting up expectations. So when you frame a story like that before you tell it, you're setting up expectations. But also just know your first sentence of your story sets up expectations. So does the second. So does the third. So does the fourth. Yeah. All of it sets up expectations, and if you're aware of that, you can do things with it that will make your story more powerful.
Awesome.
Let's take a break here real quick before the next question. I'm just going to point out where you can check out some of mine and Jay's work. You can visit calebmanure.com to find links to my comics work. The movie that I wrote, Mongolian Connection, is available for free on Amazon Prime right now, or you can rent it or buy it on other streaming platforms. And the book that Jay co-wrote, which he held up a minute ago, Death of a Bounty Hunter, is now available on Amazon. And it's also available in audio book format. But
it is. If you go to deathofabountyhunter.com, it is coming out weekly as full cast audiobook segments that are not read by me, that are read by a full cast of characters, which is pretty fun.
And as he said, it's a semifinalist in Screencraft's current cinematic book competition. So you can find links to all this in the description. We appreciate your support. And also you can go maybe just go watch the Mongolian Connection, and if you hate it, you're like, maybe I don't need to listen to any of Caleb's advice.
Not true at all. Not true at all.
All right.
Definitely listen to Caleb's advice.
Let's go to our last three pieces of writing advice.
Yeah.
And these are what we're calling the totally unexpected.
Yeah.
Or just extremely personal, perhaps, is another way to say those pieces of writing advice that you think have made you a better writer and that they may work for others as well.
Yeah. And I actually have 5, and I promise I won't go into too much detail about all of them. I just had to throw out a couple more that have been meaningful to me personally. But the first is a really obvious thing to say, stupidly obvious. And as a listener, you're going to be like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because it should be obvious. But it's living. I mean, living is, the more you live, I think the better of a storyteller you will become. I guess you could become worse because your life experiences have actually caused you to not want to tell good stories. That's possible too. But the reason I say that is because, like, my mom passed away in 2012. Before that time, I had not experienced a lot of death, like just like grandparents or like people that were not really closely associated to me. And I could have written about death, and I would have written about death, had written about death in very specific ways. But until you experience the death of someone close to you, you can't write. You will always have some semblance that you haven't lived out the experience of yet, and therefore it will not maybe ring true, right? You're trying to tell a story where you assemble your thoughts about how something might be, as opposed to knowing this is actually how it is in this circumstance, in this case. Obviously, as writers, we're forced to consistently come up with our ideas about how something might be, because we're not going to be lived experience of everything, and we're not writing memoirs. Some of us are, but I'm not. But living through these different things will give you nuances, will give you it's like when I was 20, I had 12 colors that I could use to color a coloring book, and I could make a pretty cool looking picture out of those 12 colors. But now that I'm 40, I have 24 colors to be able to utilize in this. And by the way, I can screw it up and I can use the wrong colors in the wrong places and make it look dumb. That's on me. But I have a wider palette, and I think that that's what lived experience gives us. And so my recommendation is that as you live your experience, that you reflect on it and then let it infuse itself into your writing. Because if you just live the experience and then you don't want to come back to it in your writing, and some things may be too painful for you to do that, so do that with caution and do that with wisdom. But if you are able to do it, I think you can get into emotional states that work their way onto a page, that work their way into someone else's heart, and you can be more impactful that way. So my first one is just keep living. Just keep living and observing.
But don't fall into the trap that some people do, usually young writers, into only drawing from your own life for what you're doing. Part of living is learning what other people's experiences are when they're going through similar or different things.
Great point.
They are going through something and they experience it very differently than you do. And that's part of living, is learning that your perspective is a very small one when it comes to these sort of things. So talk to people about what they're experiencing. Ask them, what emotion did that bring up in you? Or what emotion are you feeling right now? Then going back to the fact that we're hearers before we're speakers, before we're readers, before we're writers, actually listen to what they say. But then here's the key part. And you used this word a little differently a second ago, but it's the word, which is reflect. So then reflect it back to them, which is say back to someone using your own words what you thought they were communicating, and see if you got it right. And if you are able to reflect well what's an experience someone is describing to you, and you can reflect that back well, that means that you could probably write that in a convincing way without having had to go through it.
Yeah, and I'll just say it. This is a pet peeve of mine, and the reason why I love what you just said, I love it, I think it's amazing, is because of this pet peeve of mine. And that is, a lot of times when people will put on their producer's hats, like I talked about earlier, and take off their writer's hats, put on their producer's hats, they think in terms of, I want a shortcut to finding an audience for my work. And so rather than do what Caleb just referenced, which is understand, so how did my mom's death impact my brother? How did it impact my dad? If I don't understand their perspectives on my mom's death, then I only have my own perspective. But we see this happen to sell books, to sell movies in the modern day. We have become so accustomed, and a lot of this has to do with social conditioning and how we can now get whatever kind of material we prefer in whatever kind of niche we can find. So social conditioning has made us more prone to And as producers, we think this way: how do I go address the needs of the niche? And I can feed back to the niche what it wants to hear, even if that thing is not really fully true from the different perspectives that could be out there. And that drives me nuts. I cannot stand that, because that is not being an impactful writer most of the time. Sometimes it is. But when I hear, so I'll just give you an example of like a maybe more of a hot button topic. When I hear the lived experience of a person in the LGBTQ plus community, and when I hear them say, I thought the world was going to treat me this way, but it actually treats me this other way, and I talk to my friends who aren't LGBTQ plus, and I talk to other friends who are, and this is the fully realized experience, that's really meaningful. That's really powerful. That's really interesting. But if you just say, especially, it really bugs me if you're not part of the LGBT plus community, or you're pretending to be so you can sell books or sell movies or whatever. But if you just say, I actually just want to say things that other people who are hearing me say are virtue signaling, then I'm going to just put it out there, and I will have people buy it because they agree with my perspective on this and don't want to hear other perspectives. To me, that is like it's not that it's always a bad thing, because I think you should have shared experiences in your communities that you can rely on each other to help understand. But I also think that it hurts my storyteller's heart to a large degree, because I think a lot of times it cuts out other people's ways of understanding and other people's methodologies for coming together as humans and finding ways to love and appreciate one another. And it just creates barriers to other tribes and other communities. And I really dislike that. So there's my, I love what you just said. And that's why I love what you just said.
Awesome. So tell us your next, I'm going to say, go ahead and give us your next two pieces of totally unexpected advice or extremely personal advice.
Yes. The first one is understanding and learning about the way that businesses work. And I realize this is very personal to me because of the journey that I've been on and doing entrepreneurial things and all those kind of things. There is a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And it is a book on how to find an audience for a product that solves a problem that you are trying to create yourself. The old adage that, like, if you build it, they will come, which is, I know, like not even the correct quote from, not even the correct contextual framework from Field of Dreams. However, people a lot of times use that to say, like, if you write it and it's great, it will sell. That is not true. That is completely false. If you should write the best thing you can possibly write, but the process of going and finding an audience for the best thing you could possibly write is a process. And some places, like if I had chosen, we basically, this is basically self-published, right? It is published through our small press that Nathan and I operate. There are ways to shortcut that process because large business entities have found ways to shortcut that process. That's why, by the way, that a lot of large business entities will go after a niche, even if it's a bad story, even if it's not nuanced enough to address truth or make an impact. But they know that if they mention that this thing is that is equated with the niche that they're trying to reach, people will automatically buy it. Anyways, I swear I'll stop ranting about that. But yeah, my point is learning the process of how people engage and find value in things, which is a core bit. People think that business is about making money. That is not what business is about. Business is about providing a product or service that delivers value to the person receiving it or using it or utilizing it. And so we get caught up in, like, oh, well, what happened with the stocks this week? That is all like fake ways of addressing what's actually trying to happen. What's actually trying to happen is a business is trying to meet the needs of someone else in a way that they will exchange value. So think about it as bartering. I'm going to do something and I'll trade what I'm doing with what you're doing, and we'll just trade products. They're really valuable to us. I will mow your lawn if you bake me bread, and you are an awesome bread maker. So then I get some bread and you get your lawn mowed. That's the core of business, is providing services and products to people in a way that delivers value. And I think that if you can learn to think about that as a writer, if you learn to think like, well, how do I deliver the most amount of value? And the value exchange is going to be two things: them spending money on it, or them spending time on it, both of which have value, by the way. Then I need to figure out how to create the most valuable thing, and then how to find an audience who thinks that it's the most valuable thing. And so I think that that's been really impactful to me. And 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which is specifically a book for entrepreneurs, has really helped me understand how the audience's brain might work and how I might be able to speak into the audience's life by understanding what they find valuable and how they find it valuable. So that's one of them for me.
But I will clarify for writers to understand that these are two separate skill sets. You can be a very good writer and a very poor business person, and you can be a very good business person and a very poor writer. They're not a pair. You know, you may want to be a good writer and a good business person, but you're going to be stronger at one of them, and that is okay. But you want to bring people around you who help fill out, you know, your weaker areas. I'm a decent business person, but I'm not super passionate about it, about marketing and those sort of things. I can do it. I can do all of it. You know, I've studied how to write sales copy and all that sort of stuff. I can do it. I'm just not really into it. And so if I'm able to have someone else do that with my work, that ends up with a stronger result than at the end of the day, just because I think we've said this before, but build on your strengths first and then try to fill in your weaknesses. So if your strength is one or the other between writing and business, build on that first and then work on filling the others. Maybe if you're so much stronger as a business person than you are as a writer, maybe you're actually a publisher or an editor, or, you know, or a producer, which are all amazing and creative jobs that put a lot of great stuff out into the world. And likewise, maybe you're a writer who just can't sell things. And so you need an agent, or you need a manager, or you just need someone, a spouse, who's just going to say, really? We'll do that. So there are many writers, and in fact, they tend to be the writers we hear the most from, because they are great at writing and they are great at business and putting themselves out into the world, who can give us the impression that it's one skill set. But it's not.
Yes. No, 100%. And
just valuable the way they interact, but just know, you know, different skill sets.
Totally different skill sets. And what I'm actually referring to, and I apologize for this not being as clear as it could be, but that I was able to take lessons from how businesses are built, specifically startup businesses are built, and actually use those lessons to impact my writing. Not the selling of the writing, not the business of the writing, but the creation of the product, the creation of the actual book, or the creation of the actual script. Taking business principles and saying, how would I change these business principles and apply them to writing to get a better product, meaning the book or the script or whatever. So yes, they're two totally different skill sets. And what I'm referring to is, and this could be true of anything, right? Like you could be a neuroscience person, because another one of the ones I have is studying how the brain works. You could take the what you've learned from neuroscience and then say, I'm going to apply that to my writing in certain ways, and that could make you a better writer as well. So yeah, like they're different skills, but think about the way that the world works in your other chosen areas of expertise. Like, for example, I'm sure, Caleb, that you have a lot of pastoral giftedness given your actual job, right? Well, those experiences and the way that you've learned how to work with other people has definitely, well, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'm assuming it has actually influenced your writing and how you write as well, in some way, shape, or form.
Probably, but because I'm a Muse, I don't really think about it.
Yes.
I mean, my general approach is
Yeah.
I just consume as much as I can and learn as much as I can about the world around me.
Yeah.
And then I throw it all in the swamp in the back of my brain. And eventually two lizards are going to run across each other. They're going to mate. There's going to be more lizards, but I'm not actively trying to breed lizards. I'm just throwing stuff into the swamp.
Yes.
You know, and that's what you want to learn from everything around you. Throw it in there, because you never know which two ideas are going to clang off of each other. Yeah. And suddenly you've got something really interesting. Chess is an example. I spent some time a couple of years ago studying chess, because I realized chess is two varied groups of characters in opposition, which describes most movies, definitely describes most comic books. And so I studied chess to I was looking at chess moves, but what I was thinking about was character dynamics and what I could learn about how maybe less influential characters can affect more influential characters, or how characters who have one unique thing going for them can make the most, you know what I mean? It was really interesting. And so now I can think like, oh, pawn sacrifice for the queen in my head, but that means a scene for me in the climax of the movie. You know what I mean? And so,
totally.
You don't have to do that, but just do it with everything you come across. Throw it in your swamp.
Yeah, and so this is really good that we're having these kind of conversations, because I am an overanalyzer of things. And so because of the mechanic nature of the way that I think about things, I'm always trying to go. So we have a process that we use in business, in marketing. That's what my day job is that we call it A/B testing. I'm going to test A and I'm going to test B, and I'm going to see who responds to it better, right? So you can imagine a mechanic's brain is constantly A/B testing everything. In fact, most of the things that I'm saying have been really impactful to me learning more about how to write better are all things that I've A/B tested. Was the story better orally when I started with that line, or was the story better orally when I started with that line? Was my process better when I went to this, or was my process better when I went to that? And I'm just constantly, that's the way that a mechanic's brain is going to assess writing. And so if you're listening to me and you're going, that sounds so stressful and it's going to get in the way of my process, then stop listening to me and listen to Caleb. Like, this is the width and breadth of experiences. You shouldn't get caught up in one single one. We're just trying to give you tools by which to be able to do more.
Probably will notice that both of us have a version of it.
Yes.
It may look very different in execution, but the general, we both have a version of learning mental models in other fields, and that makes writing richer.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly how the mechanics of how that works is different for each of us.
Yeah,
but we have a version of it, and I think you've probably seen that through all of the things we've talked about today, or in the past. It's not that something is untrue because I do it differently. Correct. It's just, it probably is true. I have a very different version of it than Jay, or a different approach to it. I can't approach it from that side. I have to approach it from the other side, Exactly right.
I'm going to say one of these really quickly, and actually I'll go a little bit more in depth into the last one. But I think one of the things that's been really powerful for me too is, and this is really good segue, is knowing myself, knowing what the way my brain works, understanding the way that I process things, understanding the way that I get better is really important. And so if I know that I'm a mechanic, and I know that I need a Caleb in my life because Caleb is a muse. And so I need to be able to bounce things off him. I need to be able to hear the way he says things, because the way I say things and the way he says things may not be the same, but I can come to different conclusions. And so knowing myself means that I can know when I start to write a story, what is it about Death of a Bounty Hunter that is better than other books? What is it about Death of a Bounty Hunter that is worse than other books? And I can adjust my writing accordingly. I can adjust my influences accordingly. I can adjust to who I show it to and who I respond to accordingly, because I know myself a little bit better. So I think that that's really important. And then
I will say very quickly, when it comes to getting to know yourself, ask other people, because other people have such a better perspective on you than you do. It's
Yeah.
we've all experienced where we see someone going through a difficult situation in life, and we can see exactly what they need to do for the best outcome. But that when we go through that exact same situation a month later, we have no idea what to do. We're totally lost.
Totally.
The person who has the least perspective on you is you. So when you're trying to when you're trying to learn something important about yourself, ask other people.
Mm.
I do this all the time. I'll get the two, 3, 4 people who know me the best, the people who I learn something about myself when I talk to them, and
Right.
and I will ask them questions. I started doing this, I think it was 5 years ago, and I went to the 4 people who knew me best, and I said, "What do you think my purpose is? Like, why do you think I'm here on the
Yeah.
planet?" And it was interesting to watch some very clear patterns come out in their answers, which I would not have put together, but
Mm.
it gave me a very different perspective on myself because I asked them, like, what do you see in my life? What do you see coming out of the way that I interact in the world that's unique and also that you think is most valuable?
Yeah.
So I so many times we want to just like take a quiz or sit down with a book and figure it out for ourselves,
Yeah.
like read all the Enneagram profiles and then decide which one is me, but just ask other people and
Yeah.
you'll get a much clearer answer much more quickly.
Yeah.
And then finally, I would just say knowing yourself, it will help you become a better writer,
Yeah.
but it will also help you live through being a writer
Oh,
because
good point.
writing is a emotionally varied task, I will say.
Yes, it
There are
is.
a lot of emotions that happen in the writing process about your work,
Yep.
about yourself. And we've talked before how your brain actually can't distinguish between its perception of who you are and its perception of something you've made. That the
Yeah.
things you make are in neurologically considered part of you.
Yep.
And so you are going to experience a lot of things. When your characters are going through something dark, you're going to have some dark days. And when your characters are going through something lighter, you'll probably enjoy those days more. But also the way that you receive rejections
Mm-hmm.
is going to want to bleed into your work sometimes. Or if you come across a review, my advice, by the way, is I never read reviews. I never look at reviews. I don't even try to find where the reviews might be. But sometimes you come across one anyway, and then that starts to want to seep into your writing, and
Yep.
it never works. But writing is a very emotionally varied process. Sometimes you'll
Mm-hmm.
be high, sometimes you'll be low, sometimes you'll be going through something grueling because your characters are, sometimes you'll be going through something grueling because you're at the point in the story where you have narrowed your options so much that trying to find a solution that still violates expectations, as we were saying earlier,
Yep.
it just is a Herculean task. And it can take a week maybe to solve the next 200 words.
Oh, yeah.
That's tough, and that you're going to feel very different then than you do when you're starting a story, and you're going to feel
Yes.
very different when you write the end than
Yep.
you are going to feel when you're on page 30. And so yeah, just therapy and
Right.
community and friendships and getting to know yourself is going to help you through all of this
Yeah.
because you aren't a robot.
Yep.
You are this is all going to affect you emotionally, physically, to how much time you spend at your desk, spiritually. It's going to affect you on all of those levels,
Yep.
and you have to be able to go through that again and again and again
Yep.
if you want to be a writer and not an author, as we were saying earlier. I know uh, a friend of a friend who's a TV show writer. I've probably mentioned this before, but he would sit down with any younger writer who was trying to break in
Mm-hmm.
if they had written 3 scripts.
Oh, yeah.
Because if they'd written 3 scripts, he knew they could get through that 3 times, which means they could do it more.
Yeah.
It's not a good indicator if someone just made it through 1 script. And 2, it's better. But if someone can go through all the highs and lows of what it takes to write a 120 page coherent script 3 times, then it's like, okay, they've got something. They're going to keep going. I
Yeah.
can have a serious conversation with them versus just someone who's this is more of a dalliance for them, or
Yes.
or they want to be an author and not a writer. So Yeah, get to know yourself because you're going to have to survive being a writer.
Exactly. I have one more to talk about, but do you have, are you running out of time? Can I tell you another quick story?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So this is my story in response to you saying that other people will be able to point things out about yourself that you might not get to yourself, right? So I'm gonna just I had this experience where the Reclamation Society is the production company that Nathan and I started to be able to release the kind of impactful geek stories that we wanted to release. And I took the Reclamation Society through an incubator. An incubator is a resource for people starting companies. Ours is a nonprofit where you are infused with knowledge, right? Like there's weekly sessions where people come in and go, this is how you would do this. This is how you would do that. This is how you set it up. This is how you do your accounting. This is how you do whatever. So there was a night that we were going to meet with and have dinner with a Disney artist. And this Disney artist was going to come in and talk to us. And I was really looking forward to this because I'm a big Disney fan. And I knew it was going to be sort of creative and I was really looking forward to it. I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, which is so stupid because I can picture everything else about him. He even has, anyway, so he comes in. And when I say to you that Disney artist, it is likely that you would not imagine this gentleman. He is two full sleeves of tattoos. He's about 6'3", 6'4", big dude, used to play football. So not at all what you would imagine if I said like, hey, a whimsical Disney artist. You'd be like, oh. So he comes in, he's sitting down, he goes, the thing you need to know about starting your company, and I would turn this same advice back over to writers. The thing you need to know, writers, about the next project you're going to work on is why are you doing it? And so he says this to us, and he goes, he doesn't say it to writers. He says it to these people starting businesses, of which I am one. And he goes, why are you starting your business? And he starts going around the table. Why are you starting your business? Why are you starting your business? Why are you starting your business? And he kind of gives feedback to people about when they answer the question. They'll say this, and for most people, he was, I don't think that's actually why you're doing it. I think you should think about that a little bit more, right? He gets to me, and he goes, why are you starting your business? And I go, XYZ. And he goes, no. And I'm like, whoa. He's like, that is not it. And I'm like, he's like, try again. I go, how about ABC? No, that is not it either. Try again. I give him another answer. He goes, okay, you're getting closer, but you're still not there. And he goes, let's move on. And he goes to the next person down the line. Here's a complete stranger, right? Talking to me, a person who does not know oneself, and be able to externalize it as much as I should be able to externalize it in this case. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, that was really challenging. That I would not expect the creative Disney guy to like feel like he was going to crawl across the table and punch me in the face. This is crazy. 20 minutes later, I kid you not, 20 minutes later, after my like emotional turmoil of he's still at the table. We're all still at the table, right? I have an epiphany of why it is that I started the company that I started. And I go, oh my gosh, that's it. That's why I'm doing this. It revolutionized everything because now I can tell you, Caleb, why did I start this company and why is it so important to me that you and I have a podcast that is underneath this company's header, produced by this company, that is called the Impactful Writing Podcast. I have an answer for you now, but I did not have one at the table at that time. And it took someone else to point at me and say, you're not there yet, buddy. And I did come to the epiphany by myself, but here's why it's important. Even though I came to the epiphany by myself, I was not 100% confident in it. I was like, I think this is it. But I was still, you have the self-doubt of going like, but would he be happy with my response? Because I never got to talk to him again about it, right? Mm-hmm. I've talked to him since, but I've never talked to him about that. So I'm driving home to talk to my wife. I'm really getting emotional, which is not that common for me. I'm not necessarily more of as a mechanic, you can hear me talk, and I'm more like, how do I figure this out? As opposed to, how do I respond emotionally? I call up my wife. I'm pretty emotional. I go, I know why I'm starting this company, and it's because of this. And she goes, Yeah, of course it is. What did you think it was? And so she knew. So the point was, a complete stranger knew I was not on the right path, and my wife knew which path I should take, but I never bothered to say, like, why am I starting this company to my wife, right? Like, she could have told me. So I that is a story that exemplifies all of the things that you just said about why you should talk to other people about knowing yourself, right? Because it will help you get to a better place really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. So good. That was really good. So I have one more, and this will be really fast because I know we're way over, and I'm going way over because we're supposed to have 3 for each one, and I have 5 for this one. But this was really important to me too. I grew up in a Christian household that was actually, my family was part of a what I would call a cult until I was about age 5. I've heard people that were part of that cult like claim it's not a cult. They're wrong. And then
No
after
one
that,
inside a cult claims that what they're in is a cult ever. It's only outside.
I know, and all I have to do is tell you about what they would do, and you'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's a cult, bro." But so they broke out of the cult when I was about 5. We used to meet in home churches, so super conservative. And then I went on to college at a Christian university, and it was not as conservative. It was much more liberal. And in my early writing career, I had sort of thought to myself that I'm going to separate out any spiritual perspectives I have from my writing and just make my writing cool and more fun than anything else, more escapism than anything else. And so my learning is that, and I didn't learn this until probably my late 20s, early 30s. My learning was, and what I would tell to people listening is, you can write all of those stories. I have, my other book is sitting here. I wrote this book, Time Slingers, when I was in that mode of life where it was just write fun stuff, right? So Time Slingers is not very deep. It's just more of a fun story. But one of the things that's been really important to me becoming a better writer was when I sat down and I thought to myself, the world is a very chaotic, confusing place. And I would like to, if I'm going to be as a writer, I would like to explore the concept of truth, which is, I think, for anyone, even if you're an atheist, I think that is exploring the concept of truth is what I would call a spiritual pursuit. Even if you're an atheist and you don't believe in spirituality as such, it is still a spiritual pursuit based on the definition of the world of being introspective and looking at those things around you and all that. And I thought, I don't want to just write fun things anymore. I want to write fun things wherein I dig deep into me and I dig deep into society or culture and I explore those things in more depth to release something that is hopefully more impactful to the world. And I think that perspective has drastically changed my writing for the better, drastically improved my writing. And I would highly recommend that writers and storytellers at least consider that approach, because until you seek truth in your writing, not just your own truth, because that's what society wants to tell you, seek your own truth. But what you said earlier is really important. Can you talk to somebody else to see what their perspectives are? And I think that will almost always change or add nuance to your own definition of truth. The old principle of if 7 blind men were to touch an elephant, they would all describe something different. But once they come together and describe, well, I touched a leg and I touched the tail and I touched an ear and I touched the trunk. Now that you can describe an elephant, right?
But the fallacy is that the person telling you that is saying they know what the whole elephant looks like. Whenever, because right. They're saying, I know what an elephant looks like. These guys don't. They're touching different parts of it. So people are they're using that as an example to they're basically saying, I see what the picture is. Don't you see what the picture is?
Yeah.
And so it actually undermines what you think the purpose of that story is, which is to show everyone's got a different picture.
Exactly.
Because that story only works if someone actually knows what an elephant is or can see the whole thing.
Yeah. And yeah, totally true. The whole premise of the thing is kind of off, but the practice of saying, what if, imagining and asking yourself the question, what if I'm only touching a leg of something? And the only way for me to get more knowledge of what else could be is for me to go talk to other people who have had a different experience. That practice, which is what you referred to earlier, I think is incredibly important to impactful writing. Because otherwise I think that we can have trite, we can have one-sided, you're not bringing people together if you just repeat someone's beliefs back to them in a way that makes them put up a flag and go, yeah, that's exactly right. That's not, go ahead and go do that if you want to make money and you want to just be a pundit. But if you really want to explore truth and produce something that brings people together as opposed to pulling them apart and separating them, then I think you're going to have some conversations. And I think you're going to have to seek this broader definition of what truth might look like. So that's it for me.
Yeah,
I know
it's interesting that your last, are we calling these tools? I don't know what thing. Your last thing is seeking meaning or asking why, truth or spirituality, depending. And it's interesting because that's one of the that was near the end of mine and Rachel's conversation in part one of this very topic, where we talked about know your metaphysic.
Yes,
which is a great word to use if you don't like the word spirituality, which is a mushy word. Even if you believe in that there is that we are spiritual beings, the word spirituality is a mushy word and it gets used a lot. It gets used a lot of different ways, so it's unclear. You know? So sometimes metaphysic, I think, is a better term, which just means like, why do you think things exist and or matter? And that your answer to why is it worth my limited time on this planet, different metaphysics from one another. They are writing and consider what they do valuable for completely different reasons. But it's the reason they're able to keep doing it is because they have a reason that this is worth doing with your limited time on this planet. And so have an answer to that. If you're writing and you don't have an answer to that, stop writing, go get an answer to that, and then resume writing, unless your answer ends up being, you know what, I don't think storytelling is the best way I the way I want to spend my limited time on this planet. But have an answer, I would say.
And I oftentimes I find the stories of mega famous artists are really fascinating because oftentimes they will tell you how their understanding of the metaphysics behind what they were doing throughout their career has changed over time. Just like I described, my description was like super simple. Like, oh, I used to write these fun books, and now I write these more like hard to get into books. But if you listen to someone like a Kanye West, who's not that much older than me, or you listen to a Paul McCartney and you hear them talk about their careers, or you hear, you can even see it in the movies that people are making. Like, there's some people who are really consistent. Like I would say that Tarantino is pretty consistent about what he's trying to do with his films, in my opinion. But there are other directors who are wildly different across the spectrum, and it's like clearly their metaphysics, their understanding of why they're doing the thing, are changing pretty drastically over the course of their career in doing it. And I think, and I actually really respect that. I think that that's really cool that your metaphysics would change over time, because we're not creatures that are in stasis. We are dynamic. We are constantly changing, and I think it's cool to see that as evidenced in people's creative work. So, but thanks for asking the question, and thanks for at least engaging with me in it, because I was just going to do some trite thing, and like this is way more fun to actually talk to you about it.
Yes. So that is it, folks. That is 9 more ways to become a better writer. Well, you can go back and get the first 18 from Rachel and I in part 1 of this. They're not consecutive episodes, I will say. It's several episodes back.
That's right. Yeah.
That's it for today's show. Do you have any last words, Jay?
No, I do not. That was, I think I am Every time I do this show, I'm like, you talk too much. So yeah, no, I don't have any more.
I think the same thing. So maybe we're both talking the right amount. I don't know.
Yeah.
So check out Death of a Bounty Hunter at deathofabountyhunter.com. Check out The Mongolian Connection on Amazon Prime, or you can get links to my comics work from calebmonroe.com. Don't forget, subscribe to this podcast. You can subscribe today on YouTube, but you can also subscribe on whatever your preferred podcast provider is. On YouTube or under Fantasy Storytelling Reclamation Society, and the podcast channel's name is going to be The Story Geeks. So thank you, everyone, for listening. As always, question everything and seek the truth. Know your metaphysic. Special thanks to all our monthly supporters. Here are the awesome supporters who support us at $5 a month or more: Adam Vargas, Justin Weaver, Mary Baldwin, Wade Johnson, Jim Baldwin, Kimberly Lujo, Monty Thigpen, Nick Prokop, and Connie Moe. But of course, we appreciate all of our supporters, even those who haven't mentioned the name, but do consider supporting us if you like the podcast, if you're coming here regularly. Even if it's only a couple dollars a month, it makes a huge difference. So check us out, storygeeks.com. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. And by the way, great job pronouncing all the names. That was the first time you've ever done that, and you were flawless, man. Excellent
job. What can I say? It helps that you wrote the names out phonetically.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. All right, everybody.
Big help. Goodbye, everybody.
We will see you later.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, see you in 2 weeks. What's our next topic?
I think we were going to start our medium series where we compare the medium of film or comics or prose, how stories work differently in each medium.
Yeah, I'm glad your brain works better than mine.
I think that's what we talked about doing. If not,
it's
a pretty cool idea, right? Let's do that.
Great. Let's do it. We're doing it. Now, join us in 2 weeks for that. Until then, we will see you guys later, and just keep writing.
Yes.